Good morning, everyone. I think there's still some people downstairs, slowly arriving. Also, as you see, we're still lacking two members of this panel. The two MEPs had a Libe committee meeting this morning where they were supposed to vote, so they took it serious, which is good, and they promised to come here straight after, so they will be really just a few minutes late. So first of all, welcome. Welcome to this debate and welcome to CEPS. My name is Sophia Rosak and I am a researcher here at CEPS and I will be chairing today's debate. We will be talking about populist parties and their threat, question mark, to democracy. And Ben Crum and Alvaro Oliat have come out with a book on this. And in this book, they have looked at 11 EU member states and have investigated in how far populist parties in those states have actually affected democratic pluralism. And that is, I find, not only interesting, but it's also novel because there's a lot of research on populist parties and the rise of populist parties, but not so much on how does it actually affect democracies. So Ben will tell us more about the book in a minute, really. But let me just say that I find this a great moment to discuss this topic, looking at a lot of important parliamentary elections coming up in the EU very soon. I mean, we have Spain only next Sunday, but there's more this year, parliamentary elections in France, in Poland, in the Netherlands, next year in Belgium, to only name the countries that you are also covering in your book, and of course the European Parliament elections. And that all comes in times where it seems that populist parties are gaining quite some support again. So I think it is a very, very timely moment for both come out with this book and also to discuss this here today with us. And for doing so, we really have a brilliant panel here today with us. We have Commission Vice President Věra Jourová. She is responsible for values and transparency and involved in all kinds of democracy-related, yes, in all kinds of democracy-related files and issues that the Commission is cooking up. So welcome, Vice President, and thanks for being here with us. Then we have two members of the European Parliament, Ramona Strugariu, who is a member for Renew, and Gwendolyn Delbos-Corfield, who is a member for the Green Party. And both are very outspoken and active on rule of law issues. And as I said, they will be here with us any minute. And then, of course, we have Ben Crum, who is a professor at the Vrije University of Amsterdam for political science and one of the co-editors, together with Alvaro, of the book that we're discussing today. And before we turn to him, let me just briefly explain to you what you can expect in these 90 minutes. First of all, we will give some space, some time to Ben to explain the main findings of the book. And then each of the speakers will have 10 minutes to respond to this. I would also like to give a little bit of time in the panel after that to respond directly to each other, before then, of course, opening up the floor to your questions. All right, Ben, should we get started? Sure. There you go.
I take your phone. As a good professor, I get to stand behind the lectern. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you, Commissioner, for joining us and engaging in the conversation. I mean, that's a privilege for an academic to talk to politicians like the Commissioner and the members of the European Parliament that will join us soon. I should thank Sophia and CEPS for hosting us here. Xavier for setting the stuff up. And of course, my co-editor Alvaro and the team that has contributed to the book that we're talking about here. In the context of the Reconnect project, which was admittedly a Commission-sponsored Horizon 2020 a project. And the nice thing about these things is that you really indeed work across borders and you have a multinational team that allows you to look in depth into situations in different member states. Now, of course, let me see, where do I go? That's not the one. Where do I go forward?
1 second.
That one, all right. Yeah, excellent. All right. It should be that one. Hang on. I'm not moving.
But it's a good list.
It's a wonderful list. We can watch it for... It's only a few slides anyway. Thank you. So basically, of course, the basic starting point is that democracy is never safe. But particularly in these days, we know that democracy is facing particular challenges of different kinds. From outside, from the development of new media, from protests on the streets, and that's the one challenge that we will be focusing on, from parties from within that may actually not share and tolerate the democratic values of other parties and coexist with them. And that's the focus of our conversation today. What's important, I think, if you think about how can democracy save itself, is that the bottom line is that it has nothing else to rely upon than democracy. The nature of democracy is that we have to do it ourselves, that there's no external actor, no savior out there, or not even a rule or anything outside of ourselves that can save democracy. In the end, it relies on the willingness of the people and the ability of them to stand up for democracy, which makes it inherently vulnerable. But some threats are more imminent than others. So let's, I think you have to help me. Yeah, excellent. So we're focusing on populist parties. There has been a tendency, of course, we've seen many of these parties rise over the years. And when we talk about populism, of course, you have to define it, because people use the word populism in many ways, and often in a negative way. The way we define populist parties is that they mobilize against the establishment and highlight the claim that actually the divisions within the political elite are smaller than the major division between the people versus the elite, and that they, in a way, bring the people back into the elite. So, but this sense that the people have to be brought into the elite, of course, is inherent to democracy. And we also see, of course, that populist parties have been on the rise. And I think we have to admit, they won't go away. And probably that's not a bad thing. Probably it's good that party systems renew, that we see new parties rising, that give voice to frustrations in society, to groups that don't feel represented by the parties that we have. So in that sense, against some other positions that hold that populist parties are inherently inimical to democracy, our position is populist parties are here to stay, and not every populist party is inherently bound to turn against democracy. And what's important here is, of course, that populist parties vary in many respects. They evolve over time. Some start moderate and become more extreme over time. Some start rather extreme and become more moderate over time. They often actually are ambiguous internally, with more moderate wings and more extremist wings. They have different strategies on different topics, some which are more centrist and some which are more extreme. And they behave differently whether they are, for instance, in government or in parliament or fully kept outside of it. So rather than some of the literature that appeared like after 2016, when we had Brexit, when we had the rise of Trump, which was all about the end of democracy, the death of democracy, we're all going down, we say, well, actually, it's not going that quickly. And there's a lot of democratic resilience. The question is, how can we mobilize that democratic resilience to make sure that populist parties are accommodated, that they become part of the democratic game rather than that they turn against it? And then, of course, you have to be very clear about what does it mean to be against the democratic game. It's not that parties adopt policies that you or I don't like. You have to be very precise about what makes them a danger to democracy. And that is, we focus on two main indicators. One is when they fully disqualify certain societal groups. Often, of course, these are ethnic minorities, Muslim migrants who have acquired citizen status. Or when they turn against pluralist institutions that allow, indeed, the competition between different political forces on an equal basis. So those are our two focus points. Now, moving on, our findings are varied. We, unfortunately, but I think that was to be expected, there is no silver bullet solution. We don't have a magic recipe that allows us to accommodate populist parties. At the same time, I think you can say that populist parties have been accommodated more productively in some countries than they have in others. And the book, of course, reviews a lot of experiences in different countries in different ways. I won't go into all of them, but I think there's a number of highlights to make. One is, of course, that we often tend to think that a strong, well-consolidated party system is a major factor. And in that respect, of course, there has been a tendency to often, first of all, look or to be most concerned about the newer member states in Central and Eastern Europe, who have, in general, a less consolidated party system, and in that sense, maybe more vulnerable for new parties to take power and to monopolize it. But I don't think that you can talk about a Hungarian cascade, that what happens in Hungary is bound to kind of spill over. I think and actually I think that's very strong in the book. We look at Romania, we look at the Czech Republic, we look at Poland, we look at Hungary, and these are four very different cases that don't comply to a single logic, and certainly are not bound to end up like Hungary has done. What's more, when we talk about party deconsolidation, that's not a feature that's only a characteristic of Central and Eastern Europe. I mean, the party system is deconsolidated in Italy, for instance. It's completely in a flux, we know that. In France, there's quite a big vacuum in the middle. So actually we see that in different countries, different counterforces are mobilized, and that actually in most of the Central European countries, it's quite striking that there's considerable resilience, and they have not turned into, we don't see more Hungaries, and Hungary is really the exception than the rule, I would say. Now, on the other extreme, of course, you like to look at populist parties that really have become consolidated. And one case study that Alvaro has undertaken is the case of Spain, where Podemos started out really kind of, well, even arguing against the constitution, where anti-establishment rhetoric kind of spilled over into anti-system rhetoric. And of course, we've seen that they've become kind of incorporated also by, most notably, the maneuvering of the neighboring party, like the Socialist Party in Spain, that maneuvered very wisely to kind of accommodate them. That strategy does not always work. So we have the case of Austria, where we look at the FPÖ when it entered in government in 2000 and later on in the 2010s. And actually, that has not softened the FPÖ's democratic positions. And arguably, it's more radical and more dangerous to democracy now than it was in the past. The same you see that a party like the Party for Freedom in the Netherlands became kind of part of a supporting coalition for a government in 2012, and it only has radicalized, certainly in its anti-Islam rhetoric. But still, in the Dutch party system, there's another dynamic. There are always new parties that kind of outcompete the former populists, and there's a continuous renewal, which also means that none of them really become so strong to challenge the democratic system. We look at legal means in Germany, for instance, and there again, laws won't necessarily get you to safeguard your democracy. I mean, you see that the AfD, the extreme wing of the AfD, has been criminalized, but that has not disparaged forces within the AfD to still adopt rather radical positions. And also, the support of the AfD is not reducing at present. Another strategy, cordon sanitaire, something that has been practiced in Belgium here. Again, it has kept Vlaams Belang out of power, but it certainly has not weakened its positions on democracy, and it also has not taken away your support. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us here. Yeah, no, good that you had a vote and you're able to join this debate. Finally, I think one of the most fascinating and maybe also the most intimidating cases is France. Because here, indeed, I already mentioned it, you see that the established party system has been considerably weakened. There is a populist party sitting in the wings that has actually been normalized and is generally accepted as a credible party in the system, and that has engaged in a strategy where it has actually, well, changed its discourse on democracy, but it's certainly not, when we look at the other indicator, its tolerance of minorities, it remains a very dangerous force. And I think there we really have to ask how, well, is Europe just going to see what happens, or is it our common responsibility? Should we care more about what may happen in France and the vacuum that maybe Macron will leave behind? But that's maybe something that we can discuss with the panel and with you. Now, moving to my final slide, what can the European Union do? Well, first of all, I think going back to what I said at the beginning, democracy can only be saved by democracy itself. National democratic systems are our first safeguard. And actually, we should have confidence in them. And actually, I think many of them show that we can have confidence in them. Populist parties are here to stay, but democracy is not bound to die. And the EU here can be an external check, and it has a stake. Because indeed, if countries backslide, it does not only reflect on their domestic politics, it affects our common politics at the European level. It affects the positions in the Council. We know that now. It also affects the legitimacy of the members in the European Parliament. And the EU does play an active role. And we have a toolbox in place. Article 7, the rule of law framework. We now have the conditionality mechanism on funding. There is, and Commissioner Jourová is actively working on that, a package in the making on defense of democracy. There's a European Media Freedom Act in the works. So in that sense, we're doing a lot. But still, I think building on our findings, we'd like to push in a certain direction, or we also, of course, want to bring some food for discussion here. And one thing that strikes us is really, so we've been really looking at democratic backsliding, and it's striking, of course, how a lot of the work of the European Union on this issue has taken a rather legal focus. That we are talking primarily about the rule of law. We have a much more developed toolbox looking at the rule of law. And of course, democracy in a way is more difficult. Rule of law you can legalize, you can define in principles. Democracy is politics. It's less easy to kind of pinpoint. But we do think that it's a political fight, and we also have to think about it in the more political terms. And we sometimes have to be careful that it's not or. I mean, we can have both. We can have rule of law monitoring and democracy monitoring, but we should make sure that we have that political element and make it stronger. One thing is indeed to recognize indeed that the national politics is broader than the government, and to appeal and engage with actors, opposition actors in the domestic spheres, particularly where indeed populist parties come into power with anti-democratic tendencies. Another one is really indeed to monitor each other's elections and to evaluate them and to be vigilant about what can be improved and how can we make sure that they are really equal and open. A third one that was raised in our debates is to not only look at institutions, but also look at what happens, how well working is civil society. That's partly already being done, even in the rule of law framework. Also, indeed, how lively is the public debate. But also, what is the quality of the public debate? Is there enough space where parties really talk to each other, appeal to a public interest, or is there no space anymore except for just brutal position taking? And finally, indeed, the interesting thing is that when it comes to democracy promotion, we actually support media, civil society groups in other countries outside of the EU. It's more there's more reluctance to do that within the EU in our own member states. But we would really push the EU to consider it. There are member states where we may want to push more, not only in insisting on legal safeguards, but actually in fostering and making sure that there remains a thriving pluralism of democracy, from which, in the end, the whole of the EU benefits. I think that's where I'm going to leave.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ben, for this very valuable insights and good food for thought for our discussion now. And welcome. Thanks a lot for coming straight here after voting in Libe. Let me hand over to Vice President Jourová for first reactions on what you've heard, and maybe also address the question whether you think that populist parties can also be a sign of vitality of a democracy.
Thank you very much. Good morning. Sophie, I was promised 10 minutes. Is it okay?
Yes, absolutely.
For 10 minutes, it's worth to stand up there as well. I need to have a dominance over
Yeah,
the
please
audience.
feel free to stand up. Absolutely, yes.
It's a sign of my low self-confidence. Oh, thank you very much, Professor Crum, for very insightful information. And yeah, indeed, something to think about. I said already to Alvaro that I was thinking about reading some Scandinavian detective horrors, but this will be maybe more exciting. No jokes. This is a very important piece of work, and the topic of connection between populism and threat to democracy is not new, but very important, and it's great that we can discuss it today. I read a similar concept. Madeleine Albright wrote a book, Fascism, and she described how populism can lead to fascism now in European Union member states. And your concept, and I agree with that, is that populism belongs to democratic system unless the party is extremist and it needs prohibition, because we have such cases, then simply it belongs to the democratic system, and we have to work with it. And also we, and I represent, my God, who do I represent? I belong to Andrej Babiš's party. Can you imagine how life is sometimes difficult and complex? But I belong to Renew Club, yeah, in the parliament, so I will place myself there for the moment. I think that we have to work with it, count with it, and be able to counter that. And I don't want to say we have to become populists as well, but we have to find solutions for the frustrations and high level of uncertainty of people. And I asked how many definitions of populism you have in the book, because I read many of them and I am not academic, I'm a kind of amateur, but for me that's identifying the right societal problems, but offering unrealistic solutions. And the people should soon understand that this was not a good choice. And this short-termism, we saw it in banking sector. Remember the banking crisis? Short-term investments, and it had to collapse. And I think it's very similar in the society. How to do it? You see what I did to myself. We see that the populists like to create the enemy. That's the starting point. So you mentioned some of them: minorities in some countries, judges, media, the parliamentary system, which is too lengthy, too complex, too many talks, no action. So we all know that. At this moment, I see a very, I would even say, disgusting case of populism and seducing people through populistic method in the countries where we have a lot of Ukrainian refugees. Some leaders of the political parties are telling the citizens, we or the government is not doing anything for you, they only work for the refugees. You see, this is something which works for big part, or still minority, but part of the society. And in fact, it's not wise, because if the citizens will believe that, they will not vote for the governments which are helping Ukraine to win the war. And then you can bet that the refugees will stay in the EU countries, because they will have nowhere to go. They will not have their country again anymore. Yeah, so it's for me, this is the illustration of this short-termism in thinking and a quick effect kind of solution. Creation of the enemy. I will stop bashing populists, and I will rather look at what the mainstream parties should do to counter that, because I am sometimes nervous about the continuous lamenting, yeah, the populists are doing this, nationalists that. and the rest of our troubles are caused by Putin and Zuckerberg. This is the narrative we hear very often. This mixture of those who are guilty for the problems we are not able to solve. We have to be able to solve the problems. And what the people are telling us, and also we heard it in the conference on the future of Europe, if you remember, there was a lot of it. Frustration and high level of uncertainty, even anxiety we see in society. Injustice, inequality, either real or the feeling, it's with us for a long time. Abuse of power, that's why the populists are so easy in attacking the elites. Yeah, because they throw all the elites into one basket, be it mainstream politicians, be it academic people, be it scientists. Elite is the public enemy at this moment in the concept of populists. Corruption, it's another source of the frustration, and the absolute inability to communicate things clearly to the people. We communicate in miserable way. And I will repeat it again and again. The people do not feel that we play fair with them. They don't understand. The world is complex. Political things, sometimes very technocratic things. Yeah, this is complex, but we should be able to explain what we plan for them, what will come, not to promise in 2 weeks' time, but what will come in due time, because we have solutions for maybe midterm and longer term, and we have to be able to explain that. I deal with disinformation. I will always tell everyone that the fight against disinformation must not be censorship. No, it must be the truth and the facts which are explained to the people. How many minutes do I have? 5? I have so many interesting things to say still. I remember also something which illustrates that we started to be focused too much on ourselves and the institutions. In the conference on the future of Europe, it was a unique exercise. There were the professional career politicians, national ones, European Parliament members, and the citizens selected on the basis of the sample. And these two groups were very often, not in all cases, we have the 2 MEPs here, so I have to be careful, but we very often, the problems shared by the citizens were different from the ones from the politicians. And when I will use the word normal people sitting in this room, they were repeatedly listening the talks about Spitzenkandidat. What are they speaking about? What is it? Why should we discuss Spitzenkandidat? What is it? We have a big pile of the real problems. But it continued till the bitter end. And so for me, this was interesting to watch it, because at the end there was the conclusion that Spitzenkandidat system will happen. But the people who were sitting there, who had different jobs in politics, they didn't get it. What the EU is doing, because I am not here to analyze, rather to give you some information about the solutions, not the solutions for the next 14 days. We work on protection and defense of rule of law and democracy intensely since, let's say, 2015. Because the start of the justice reform in Poland, one freezing night in December, you can build 20 years the justice system and you can demolish it overnight. It's one lesson I learned. Then many factors which also you mentioned, migration, terrorism, Trump in White House and so on. We simply had to start defending and fortifying the basic principles, rule of law and democracy in the EU in much stronger way. So we have now the rule of law report, which keeps the attention to the rule of law as the basic principle permanently. And it serves for the discussion with the member states and with many important players. Fair political competition, so protection of elections and protection of media. I think that it belongs there. We have the Media Freedom Act. Coming back to rule of law, yes, we have the financial instruments, the conditionality and conditioning of the EU funding by respect for the Charter of Fundamental Rights. I said some years ago that who doesn't understand the values might at least understand the money. And we see that this is the real push, which is uneasy to cope with even for Viktor Orban. Fair political competition, free and fair elections, free of manipulation and AI interference. It's a new topic. In the campaign, the combination of AI used with disinformation, it's the end of free and fair elections. Yeah, let's face it. So that's why we have to counter that with a real and strong instrument. And last thing, security and resilience of the system. Again, I have to speak about the disinformation, which we understand as intentionally created campaigns in a coordinated manner, which has the potential to threaten the system, the democratic system. We don't speak about conspiracy theories and fake news. Yeah, we speak about this coordinated attack. So there we have our tools against that. We have the code of practice against disinformation, which from many member states I hear, let's use it to kill the uncomfortable opinions which appear online. Forget it. You have to come with the opinions which will work for the people, which the people will understand. No censorship. We speak about the fight against disinformation in the way that we want the facts to be right, to be fact-checked, to be delivered to the people, to make their free choice. No way, no censorship, no correcting of uncomfortable opinions. Even the opinions of Viktor Orban. I am here to protect his right to say his things. And I think that we have to protect this. This principle is called of freedom of speech. Foreign influence, last thing, I am now working on the defense of democracy package. You mentioned ready to answer your questions. It will be short, it's in the making. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you very much, Vice President. Let us continue straight away, and let me lead over to Ramona Strugariu. I've introduced you in your absence. We know that you're very active. Both of you are very active on rule of law issues, so I'm very happy to have you both here. So one of the book's core arguments was that the EU's rule of law framing has been legalized in a way that it prevented a more political approach towards member states and populist parties. What's your take on this?
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here and part of this debate. And like you probably found out, I just came back from the Libe vote on the European Media Freedom Act that we've been trying to have on the table for a long time. Same with the anti-SLAPP directive. It's not by chance that I'm mentioning media freedom and freedom of expression as maybe some key pillars also related to today's discussion. And I'm also very grateful to the Commissioner, because without her it wouldn't have been possible. I mean, that's a fact. But both of them have a lot to do with what we are facing on with populism, with the rise of populism today, and also with efficient means of counteracting populism. I fully agree that it's here to stay. You know, back in the 1817-19, basically in the aftermath of the Franco-Prussian War, when first of them started to pop up, there was no discussion about whether, you know, they're they're functioning in a democratic framework, or if this is a sign of vitality of democracy. They were building themselves in a context of high deprivation of something coming after a war. You know, in Germany, the folkish movement was starting to talk about the original nation, and that's how the first anti-Jewish feelings were born, and they kept raising. It took a while. And then in France, the La Ligue des Patriotes was calling on these legislative plebiscites, now representation. Direct democracy, can you imagine? I mean, we were discussing direct democracy so many years ago, and in the late 19th century. And what is funny about is that as soon as they come to power, they basically do exactly the opposite of what they preach. Because there's one person or one group of people, very tight group of people holding on to power and representing the citizens and representing the people and embodying the power of the people. And this is a real danger. As a matter of fact, and I think that the right and far-right populism is more prominent and with a more prominent tendency of backsliding. I think the fact that they are actually able to come to power, or that they grab power, and it happened, is a very, very, I would say, a red alarm sign for the health of our democracy. Because I don't think they enjoy pluralism, but pluralism allows them to be. And pluralism is part of democracy. And it is something that we're fighting to preserve as a matter of fact. I want to reply to your question about legalizing and preventing the political approach with a very simple answer. No, we've always had the political approach. It didn't work. We have to do both, actually. And they do have a political approach in the sense that when we were discussing, think about Vilnius, think about the discussions with Sweden and Finland joining NATO, for example, which was a separate topic from the European Union. How Hungary motivated this was that these countries are humiliating Hungary, and they're telling everybody that they don't respect, that Hungary doesn't respect the rule of law framework. And we had this approach of banning or opposing support for Ukraine on all kinds of processes that we're trying to build in the European Union, because they think it is fair to blackmail decision makers and the European Union. And they are practicing that because they are in power and because they can influence EU policies. And there was a discussion about whether the existence of anti-democratic or populist party in one country can influence the situation in other countries. Well, definitely yes. And it can do it for several reasons, as a matter of fact. First of all, because it inspires and gives ideas to others to do the same thing. Second of all, because I think it puts pressure even on mainstream parties to adopt similar policies, because otherwise they're losing votes. And then once they come to power, they are trying to influence EU policies in this sense. And we have examples with Hungary, Poland, but we have examples of other member states as well. I know that in the discussions and the negotiations for any piece of legislation which has anything related to gender issues, gender equality, and so on, the word itself is a red line for certain delegations. And this says a lot about how they actually exercise and are trying to influence power and policies in the European Union. Should we be really hard on them and have very, very strict legislative measures? Well, it depends how populist one gets, and I think that where you have situations when they go against basic human rights and fundamental rights, there's a major issue. We didn't even have this framework of respect for fundamental rights and values. The Europe of values is the youngest of all of our structures. I think that it's also the most fragile one. We're talking about these things starting with the Lisbon treaties. We weren't really discussing about this framework before and how to protect it and how to protect fundamental rights in this union. And populists build on this concept of otherhood. The other who's not like that, the enemy, the scapegoats, classical, the elites, the migrants, the Jews, somebody with a different sexual preference. And all of these things, once they're enforced and emphasized through this extremely nationalist and anti-system and against the other speeches and also measures if they come to power, they turn against basic fundamental rights. This is the truth. When they become extreme, they are an attack against human rights. I don't know if you remember speaking about the otherhood and how we can work more and better to prevent that. I don't know if you remember the story of Csanad Szegedy. He was also a member of the European Parliament, and he was a prominent leader of Jobbik in Hungary. And he was considering, he's actually the founder of the Hungarian Guard, who was wearing the black uniforms and reminding of a pro-Nazi party who led Hungary for a brief period after the war. But to some point around 2010, before that he was publicly stating that Jews are filthy lies, and the hate speech was terrible. Well, he found out that he himself was a Jew, and that actually his grandparents survived the concentration camps. And it was a very powerful mental switch back then, who determined him to fully reconsider his position. And I am turning back to what we should do and what the European Union should do more and better. So many things. Because people's fear, which allows populism and extremism to grow, is built on lack of knowledge and opaque decision taken behind closed doors, improperly communicated to people. I fully agree with the commissioner that we're lousy at communicating with people. We should be able to do a lot more in terms of simply, plainly, straightforward communicating on what we do and what the European Union does properly for them. Is it populist to go tell people in the villages that when they cross the bridge towards their school and their children cross towards their job, or their children cross the bridge towards the school, the new school in the village, they're stepping literally on EU money? I don't think it's populism. I think that they should know that we're doing that. I think that they should know that the subventions in agriculture are saving countries, and the work of the farmers who are struggling. I think that they should know that their children and grandchildren are able to travel freely and learn and become what they dream what their parents and grandparents dream of, I don't know, doctors and philosophers and scientists, because we have Erasmus and Erasmus Plus. And this is probably one of the huge achievements of the European Union. For Romania, children who literally could not ever afford to travel had this possibility because of this wonderful program. I think they should know that even in the absence of a health union, we were able to rescue millions and millions of lives during the pandemic with simple words. Because, you know, populism will always stay there for the mere reason that it's the easiest thing in the world is to be against the system. And to say that we're good at nothing or almost nothing, or the elites always know and they decide for the others without consulting and without talking to people. But the big question is, what do you replace them with? How do you fill the gaps? Then if this is not good and this is not enough and this is not done properly, then what is that system and how does the system need to look like in order to improve the quality of life? So we need to get out of the bubble, first and foremost. Technocrat language is something that nobody ever understands in you know, not even in some parliaments. I'm pretty sure that they have no idea about all of the institutions of the European Union. And go and talk to communities and let people know precisely where they feel the fear and the pain that some things are being done. We don't have to invent the wheel for this, because we have local media, which is literally dying in many places, in many countries, and which is attacked systematically in countries like Hungary and Poland. And if we could provide simple instruments of support for this local media, which is also under political threat, and some non-governmental organizations, I saw your ideas there related to media support and civil society. We already have some instruments at the union level. And the Rights and Values Fund and so on. Big steps have been taken, but that's not enough. I think we can do more. I think, and I've always been the supporter of a permanent fund, being able with independent management, and here we have organizations of the press, for example, and activists, which could be management authorities, but with very little money. For example, free local media, which means deep state, pretty much everywhere, can tell people that the kind of things that I was mentioning before. The interesting part is that they do it anyway, but with less and less means, and fewer of them, because they do not actually have this minimum instruments to be able to support themselves. And they also bring, you know, quality news to these people who are back there and they only hear that the European Union makes them eat cockroaches. And we're giving up our country and land to foreigners. And that the union is there above and we're taking decisions on their behalf without nobody else asking them how to proceed. And one last thought, and then I'll stop here, but maybe we have the opportunity to talk later about it. Part of the populism is encouraged by the attitude of some governments when it comes to talking themselves to their citizens. Governments have to communicate transparently and openly to people. Governments need to answer requests for you know, some have legislation in this sense, for requests for information on behalf of public interest. Governments need to guarantee editorial independence, and we have to do it. Journalists need to be free to exercise their job. Just a few examples, but I'm sure we will continue with them.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Ramona Strugariu, désolé. Thank you very much for this candid points, and let us lead over to Gwendolyn Delbos-Corfield. We've heard now from Ben and also from Ramona the idea, or that it's actually already implemented, to support better national media and social society. What is your take on this?
Yes, hello everyone. Of course, very important topic. I am very concerned about EU democracy, so I think it's very important that we are more and more thinking about it. Just to say that I, of course, didn't have the time to read all of the study, but I had a look to various aspects and went through it quickly. And I just wanted to start by saying that there's, I thought it was very interesting, and I will use it. It's food for thought. But I had a first comment, which was that I think that we still need to be a bit. I mean, I feel that it's not the same far right attacking democracy and populist party, and I do make still this difference. I do think that it is, you have a number of examples that are left-wing populist parties, and I would not deny the word populist, and I'm very annoyed when they have very general assessments and comments on democracy, on elites, on journalists, and I think it's very dangerous, but I still don't put them exactly in the same box as the very far right parties that really have established, even in their statutes and their text, and they are very clear about it, that they don't want democracy. And I think that Hungary and France are two very interesting examples from that point of view, because I always, as a rapporteur on Hungary, I always recall to everyone that Orbán started as a liberal, and Orbán didn't start as a populist party at all, and he even was the symbol of freedom after years of Soviet Union, and he then decided, basically in a very personal and opportunistic way, that he wanted to keep the power, whatever, and capture it, and then he found indeed populist means to keep the power. So it's how you can also be a very cynical person and just want the power and want the money and want to have no one else decide, and then you use populist things, which is very different from the French situation. I asked two searchers, in fact, two academics, Laurent Pech and Sébastien Platon, to do a study on would the French system be resilient to the attack of a far-right populist person arriving in a very presidential system, because what Hungary has also learned to us is that they now come in a very democratic way. They come in, they don't come with tanks and guns. You know, the next democracies are not going to die and because of tanks and guns. They are going to die with parties coming into power in a democratic way, and once in place, destroying all of this. And the French far-right party has always been very clear on what it wants, and it says it in its text, and it is indeed sometimes a bit smoothing some of its talks, but it's still, but we have not, and we're not taking care of that, and we are just letting them progressively come to the place where they will be maybe one day in power, and I'm very worried about this. So this was my first comments. So to answer now what we could do, I indeed think, so I think that Hungary, the Hungarian situation, more even than the Polish one, because it's a bit more years, has learned EU a lot, and we have been reacting to what happened in Hungary, and we are putting now in place things that would hopefully help to prevent a new Hungarian situation, hopefully. And indeed, it's Article 7 being done and making and not making sometimes progress and not being so efficient, but it is put in place, and we are learning through putting it in place, and we are learning how we have tools and how we need to use it. But it's also inventing new tools, the Media Freedom Act, the Defense Democracy. I mean, Media Freedom Act comes from Hungary because Orbán got all of these oligarchs' friends to buy all of these medias. Then we got this Keshma structure, very opaque structure. And then we were sort of in EU thinking, what can we do about this? Because well, how can we? So then we invent the Media Freedom Act. And so we have learned a lot. And I think that we have learned on justice a lot. That's where probably we've been as far as possible. We have put in place a number of things about justice, and we enforced our speech, and we enforced also through the European Court of Justice, making a number of jurisprudence and all this. So now we have established that. Now we are establishing it for media. The Media Freedom Act is, for me, one of the most important things that should come out of this term. There's today a fight with publishers, and we have to say it, and we have to win this fight, because we need the obligation to be transparent on where comes the money. We need, indeed, also, as Ramona already said, we need money to independent media, pluralism of media. And so the fact that Commissioner Jourová and others are fighting for this Media Freedom Act is very important. For me, it's the next very important step. And we're not yet there. And then something that we haven't tackled at all, and I don't know if it will be in the defense and democracy package, is the electoral rules. I think that this is something where we would have legal ground in EU to look at this, because today elections are happening in Hungary, and they're happening in a fair way. I mean, observers go there and they can tell you there was no problem. I was there was no problem. But then, indeed, you have the media thing, when the Budapest mayor has had in the 5 last years 5 minutes on TV. Well, you can see the level of non-media pluralism when you are the mayor of the biggest city. But you also have the money that is put in electoral campaigns. And the ambassador, the French ambassador in Hungary, and she has arrived she hasn't arrived since a long time, and she was telling me, you know, I find that we are very harsh with Hungary, because it's true, Hungary is a place, I always say it, you have no journalists detained, the police is very calm. I come from France, you can't do one demonstration without getting attacked. This is never the case in Hungary. I was there for the Pride. It's very nice, very calm. It's a self-censored society all the time. So there's this vision sometimes that we are being too hard on Hungarians, and she was a bit trying to sell this to me, because she's an ambassador, so she has to have diplomatic words. But then she was saying, but something that I'm really, really shocked is the electoral landscape. They have no rules. And then she didn't know that, because she's a diplomat. I said, you know that we are the only ones to have rules in France on capping of the amount that you put in money, on who indeed during our election campaigns in France, you are obliged, every party is at the same time on TV, and they have to count the TV stations and the radios, they have to count and all this. So there's a number of things where we are not today having an equal landscape for electoral things, and I think that this should be something we work on, because we cannot say that we defend democracy in a very general way. We have to have rules to defend democracy. And then the third thing is, of course, a civil society. I think that civil society, think tanks, people fighting for democracy, yes, groundwood organizations are today one of our solutions, and they are sadly sometimes presented as the problem. And I really don't get that. I think that we are not empowering enough civil society. I know this is also one of the aspects of defense of democracy package. I think this is very important. These peoples are the ones that have been upholding in Hungary the rule of law and the democracy. They have been upholding it in Poland, but they are also upholding it in the countries next to EU, in Serbia, in the Balkans in general. They are the ones that are fighting for European values, and we need to strengthen them much more than we are. And for a certain part of the political landscape, the right and the far right, they have become one of the enemies, and this is a real problem. I think we need to engage a lot in discussion with EPP to say, you know, you need to stop criminalizing civil society, because this is really very dangerous for democracy. And just so 3 last things to finish, I think that now we have also another problem apart from populist parties, is populist society and populist debate. That is today for me the worst problematic thing. The topics I work on since years and years and years, climate, feminism, even democracy, they have been themselves become a populist topic, and some of the way that, for example, the feminist issues are today portrayed in France, it's very difficult for me because it's, again, the us against all of the others. And feminist was not that. That was the fight against patriarchal system. It wasn't me against all the men and those that like men, and, you know, and we are getting in this. But I could choose climate, I could choose a number of topics where I've been working, and the populist debate is for me. And then how do you become a good politician in this world? Through polemics in Twitter. This is how you exist, and this is one of our huge problem. Where is the place for nuance? Where is the place for reasonable talks and all this? So I think that this is an issue that we really need to see how we're going to do it. We need to bring back intelligence in discussion. We have the huge problem of disinformation, and Mrs. Jourová said it very clearly, censorship is not the solution. So how do we bring back facts and truth and intelligence in discussion? And we have the problem of ethics. I think that this is still very important. We need to become very good on ethics. We are not enough. And one of the big gains of populists is that they can always show that indeed we have been, I mean, in Hungary it's very clear. It's still very difficult for the opposition to overcome the big corruption scandals that were before. It's huge, but this is in all countries where every time that mainstream parties have not been good on money, have not been good on corruption and all this, it just comes back in our face very strongly. So I think that ethics is also a very important thing.
Thank you very much, Ben. I lead right back to you because I could imagine that you would like to pick up or even push back on one or the other point. I will check in the audience whether there are questions after this, so if you have any, feel free to prepare them. But first, Ben, would you like to take the floor again?
Of course, and I'm very grateful for your feedback and ideas, and also I'm very happy that we're having this debate, because it's not an easy debate. And I want to highlight two things that I find fascinating in debate. One is, I think, and the Commissioner said it very articulately, we have to go beyond bashing. I mean, so I think it's interesting how we talk about populism. And what we try to do in the book is also that populism is an ambiguous thing, and that it's there for a reason. So there's no point in disqualifying populism per se, and certainly not people who are incentivized or motivated by it, and to whom it speaks. I mean, you don't want to disqualify the voters of populist parties. So, and it's funny that it's very difficult sometimes to avoid that in the end, yeah, we should not bash, but in the meantime, often I think we often say, we kind of have these rather generic points about them, but I think we should actually exploit the ambiguities that are often inherent in populism. And I think it's very interesting what Gwendolyn just said about that Orban started out as a liberal, and it just makes me wonder, was he bound to go there for the sake of power, or would other interactions have allowed him to go another way? So I think you have to look at it as a process, and also, yeah, there's also a point to populism. It doesn't come out of nowhere. It often also mobilizes on genuine concerns. So I think that's where we have to avoid sometimes to talk about only them, but also, so that's one point. And the other point that I find very interesting, and where I think it's maybe easier for the parliamentarians to be on our side, but more difficult for the Commissioner, is very much about how, I mean, if indeed the democracy of other member states is our concern as well, then you can say, well, we can agree on rules, we can talk about protection, but can we really also talk about indeed European, well, proactive engagement? We talked about local media, that's a good example. And local media is maybe relatively simple. But what indeed, well, talk about Italy. Should the European Union support LGBTQ+, but you know what I mean? Should we support those groups in Italy? Because they are under pressure. And they may actually be marginalized in the public debate. But what does it take for Europe to actually intervene, and how legitimate is it? And will it not backfire if you start to support certain groups? Will they not be seen as handmen of Brussels? So I think that's a very difficult game. I think we have to talk about it. I think we want to move. We cannot just say we have to have common standards and protection. No, we have a stake there, and we owe it maybe to the democratic forces. And Gwendolyn also highlighted the civil society groups that do a lot of the important works there. but what claim and how can Europe really be on their side in an effective way that is itself also still democratic and also respects? So I think that's where the boundary of the debate is. It's probably where it gets difficult and where also maybe the Commission is going to say, well, wait for my package. But I think that's where we have to talk about, is there something beyond protecting about really engaging, and what would it take?
I felt you wanted to come in on the first one.
Well, now also on the last one. My God, I forgot what I wanted. No, I have something here. I think I said at the beginning that the rule of law applies to Europe as such, for European Union level and the member states level. And I am big defender of the checks and balances on European Union level. So for the Commission, there is a clear task given by the treaty. For the Parliament, it's always not enough because we sometimes sound legalistic, we sometimes are legalistic. But for instance, on LGBTI rights, we are not supporting activists. We are not. But we are supporting the projects which protect the fundamental rights of everybody. Zero tolerance for discrimination, zero tolerance for hate speech. This is even addressed by the legislation. Yeah. So I think that we always try, here I speak on behalf of the Commission, we try to find the right position, not to be activistic ourselves, and we are heavily criticized for that. Maybe my follower will be a bigger revolutionary than me, but I really try to defend the checks and balances on European level. The second comment, when I criticize Hungary, I always criticize Hungarian government, and I never criticize Hungarian people. And here we have a long-lasting discussion. I would never say that the citizens are populistic. The citizens simply have their feelings, their opinions. And of course, I also don't like the situation when Mr. Orbán is applying the politics, referring that he has the blessing from his people. But that's the fact. He received Victor received victory in the elections. And of course we are watching what OSCE said about the elections, whether they were free and fair. And some time ago I really pissed off Mr. Orbán by saying that it's ill democracy. And what I had in mind, we have to pay attention to whether in Hungary there will be free and fair elections always. And here comes the limited space for independent media and no space for public service or state media to criticize the government. Yeah? So I always criticize the government here and not the citizens, because we have to respect that result of their will. But of course we also have to criticize when we see manipulation. And I will stop here. Still keeping, and you inspired me, Madame Delbos-Corfield, for saying another definition of populism, maybe. When the populist parties become the governmental parties, there is always a qualitative shift and shift in the politics. Because when they are hidden somewhere, not hidden, when they are in the parliaments, of course the responsibility is not the same as when you happen to win the elections. And I have a suspicion that many populist parties simply do not want to be winning the elections to get to the government, because they would have to become responsible and accountable. This is not what they are so strong at. Who is the original speaker here? It or an? Strong? You are. So my point is, when the populist party starts to govern the country, then we see that one of the features is that the winner takes all principle comes. So here comes the attack on judiciary and media and so on. And the second thing, I see that the politics is reduced to the method how to keep the power. That's the main goal of the populists in the governments. And here I think it should be covered by the media, by the active citizens. There should be a strong rejection of politics being reduced to just the effort to keep in power. And last comment, and I will shut up. What I forgot to say at the beginning, we didn't speak about trust. Democracy has to work. The driver of democracy is trust of the people. But it's not one-way communication. It must be two-way. So we ask the people for the trust, and they should have our trust that we can play fair with them, tell them the unpopulistic truth. We have to trust that the people, the citizens, will be able to use their critical thinking and stand this unpopular truth, especially in these times, very turbulent, unhappy times. This is especially very difficult, but we have to try again and again. So trust both ways. Thank you.
Yes. And they are trying, just to continue your idea, to grab the power and hang on to power, but that's okay because they speak on behalf of the people. So they always represent the people because that's the main motto of the populists. No, seriously, I think almost every single opposition party in this world has a little bit of populism, especially when campaigning, because they go against established, coalitions, governments, and so on. So part of it is there. And if they want to stay eternally as opposition parties, then they will continue probably to a certain degree with this approach. And then yes, when they come to power, then it is about filling those gaps and proposing an alternative solution and becoming credible and gaining people's trust. And every time the confidence of people into a government proposal policy decreases, populism rises. And I've seen it happening, and I see it in my country with plenty of examples. People trust less and less, I think, some governments and some of their solutions. And the fact that they don't properly communicate with them and they don't explain and then they feel abandoned gives very powerful ground to populism. To me, Taiwan was a fascinating experience in the sense that they are at war every day. And they are so much in love with democracy because of the fact that they are at war every day. And they're really fighting so hard, they have about 30 million cyber attacks per day. And the fact that they have to build this resilience against a huge totalitarian threat makes them very alert to all of the means that they need to use to protect their democracy. Go vote. Really support those political parties that they believe in. Become very actively engaged. They have full respect for everything that means public participation. These are things that we should do ourselves as well, because democracy is not a given. Then the other thing that I wanted to comment upon about the LGBTIQ, should we support them or not, on all kinds of protection of minorities is also part of the democratic exercise. We're supposed to do that and take the minority opinion into account. How many people do you think that understand what LGBTIQ means? And in terms of science, what different sexual orientation means? From all of those people who fear that the European Union will make men give birth to babies. Because this is what I heard in my country with the Matic report. And then there was an explosion accusing us that because of the European Union decision, men will give birth to babies, and that LGBTIQ people will steal all of our babies and they will just run somewhere with them. People do not know. It is a matter of education. It is a matter of explaining, like I said, in simple words, basic things that they have no idea about. Everything becomes very, very emotional, but that very, basic scientific information or just explanation accompanying one measure or another. They just know that LGBTIQ is something to be afraid of, that will take something away from us. And it's true for other kinds of policies as well. Or when we talk about equality and gender equality, what does it actually mean? They have no clue. I'm traveling to my country all the time, talking to people. They don't know. Violence against women and how we're countering this. They feel frustrated because there's still a lot of violence, and women cannot work. That's a problem. For them, this is something that should be secured by a government or by the union or by anyone. And I think they need, and we need to understand more and more how to answer directly to this kind of question as well.
Many thanks. Who has a question in the audience? Yes, please. Do we have a microphone? No, we have a shortage of microphones. Maybe you could borrow yours. Ah, yeah, thanks. Okay, first the gentleman in the red. Yes, could you please introduce yourself? That is name and affiliation, and also preferably tell us who you would like to answer your question. Thank you.
So I'm Charles de Groot. I'm a Maastricht University student. I just finished my master's in European Studies on the topic of the Spitzenkandidaten system. But my question is more about this question, how can the EU and its member states prevent populist parties? And I think that on the one side, of course, you have the strengthening of the populist parties, but on the other, you also have the weakening of the traditional parties. And in that sense, don't you think that fundamentally it's a crisis of legitimacy, input legitimacy, and output legitimacy? Yes or no?
Thank you very
much. Open
much
to everybody.
We're going to collect a little bit. Yes, please.
Hi, my name is Bert Hagt from BVA. I'm a German national working for a Spanish company. And in that context, I would have a question about the cordon sanitaire against populist parties. And to all of you, what do you think? Should there be a cordon sanitaire applied or not? Does it help or not? Does it preserve democracy or not?
I would like to take a third question. Ladies first.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm from SEPS, Bertemige, so I work 2 floors above. And I'm Hungarian, so I was really interested in what you were saying just earlier. And I wanted to say that I'm also happy that we finally mentioned education at the very end, and we still sort of haven't mentioned education of children, really. So it seemed that we were talking a lot about how to inform people through communication of the EU to adults, which is absolutely poor, but I see that we all understand this. So I think my question would mainly be to, that's a good question to whom? Actually, I want to pinpoint someone so we don't spend a lot of time. But my question would be about how, even if we manage to mitigate the next Hungarian situation from happening, how to use education to sort of clean up what's already been happening in terms of misinformation, disinformation, not voting, not interacting with the political system. And obviously into this, there's this question of political overreach that you've been talked about what is the claim of the EU to even talk about this. And to think about that, I also wanted to say that, for example, textbooks in Hungary are just factually wrong. So there it seems that there might be a gateway to talk about it, especially since the EU actually advises, for example, Palestinian Israeli textbooks. So within its own system, it could also do this. And this question then is going to go to the commissioner. The vice president. The vice president. Oh, I'm sorry. So I wanted to say that perhaps the EU could think about its own textbooks as an example. Textbooks or the curricula. How much reach could it have into the educational system of member states?
Thanks a lot. Ben, would you like to comment on the cordon sanitaire? I mean, I know that this was content also in the book, so maybe you can enlighten us a little bit what you have found out.
Well, as we said, I mean, there is no silver bullet solution, and the cordon sanitaire is certainly not a silver bullet. And so we have a study of the way that other Belgian parties dealt with the Vlaams Belang, which I think is one of the main examples where a cordon sanitaire was formally announced by parties. And actually, our contributors from the University of Leuven come out rather skeptical. It has not de-radicalized the Vlaams Belang. It has not eradicated support for them. So I think you want to be, and then again, I mean, the alternative solution, of course, to co-opt or make populist parties responsible doesn't necessarily help either. So it's calibrating. It's somewhere in between. I would say that a cordon sanitaire, I think, is really not the first thing you want to jump upon. And it really, I think, it should not be about policies. It should really about these parties violating deep red lines when it comes to toleration of minorities and democratic institutions. And then it comes into place. But again, it's not gonna, it's not a prime solution. And I think really keeping in conversation with populists and with their supporters is a major issue, or should be a major concern in that sense. That speaks against the cordon sanitaire. If I can say just one quick point also on the input-output legitimacy, and I mean, I think what we're seeing is process of party system renewal, no? And I think that's great in a way, that we see new parties coming in, and it happens in a lot of systems. I mean, the thing is, of course, that it comes these days with a lot of fragmentation, and fragmentation can be really risky, but it also means that often renewal continues. I'm not, and I do think that solutions have to be found there. I don't think it's enough to simply say, well, I mean, it's part of course, you want to have better policies and you want to have better communication, but in the end, it's also about how we deal with the parties and with the input into the system. And it's not by good policies and good communication that you're going to solve the whole question that we're addressing here.
Gwendolyn, would you like to comment on the question of Berta? Like, how do you clean up of everything that happened in Hungary already, if I can paraphrase it like this?
Yeah, well, on that specific question, the thing is we do not have European legitimacy to work on education. I mean, that's the point. Indeed, I mean, Ramona gave the example of Romania. The example of Hungary is the fact that people really, in last elections, believed that we were putting a lot of investment and time in changing the sex of children in first grade of school, which was one of the campaigns of Orban, along with the one of putting we were going to send young people to Ukraine. There would be, obligatory enrollment in military. So on education, it's difficult because it's really not our legitimacy. And we come back on the debate of where we're legitimate. For me, LGBTI, that's not a problem because indeed it's the fight for fundamental rights, like the migrants, like the Roma. I mean, that's easy. Education is not that easy. That being said, I think we have lost in mind education and culture in general. I mean, this is, and academic science. We're putting more and more money in technology science, but no more in academics. I mean, EU on that has lost on a number of things, and we need to be better. I think in education, there's of course the question of having guidance that we could do. Because fundamental rights is important, so we could say, you need to. We could have a big thing about learning more about EU. I mean, I always say that I think that any citizens of EU should learn about the Charter of Fundamental Rights. You should be empowered and entitled to know very young that these are your rights in EU and they can be defended up to the judicial. So yeah, I think that on that we could do more, and this is not intervening. And I also think that education is also outside, and then the problem is it's not just in school and of this, and that's when we defend ourselves better. So I'm coming a bit out of the topic, but it is about communication. I don't understand why we didn't learn the lesson of Brexit. We let people say false things about EU, and there was no communication coming from EU side. And again, with the freezing of funds in Hungary, we had these huge billboards all over Hungary saying false things. I mean, saying, and how we can, and that is also something that a child or teenager will see, and he will see the billboards. So this is also just 2 quick points. One on cordon sanitaire. I think that it's exactly that. It's one of the tools. It's not all of them. You need, I mean, I come from a country where it has been put on the side and it's dangerous, but indeed it's not doing any miracles in Belgium either. So you need, but I think that cordon sanitaire is on, and that's exactly what you said, it's on the really bad things. I do not understand why we don't have more in EU of German approach of the situation. When you say something that is racist, anti-Semitic, hating, it should be forbidden. That's it. I mean, you can go in French TV every day. We have people every day on French TV saying things that are against fundamental rights. And it's as simple as that, and anti-Semite and racist. And this is not normal. So this is not cordon sanitaire. It's just, why are we letting this happen? And this is one way of having at least a bare cordon sanitaire. And then last thing on legitimacy, I agree that it is a question of legitimacy, but we need the traditional parties to reinvent and to be able to answer this, because I don't agree that it's all about renewal and all about pluralism. It's very important to have renewal and pluralism, but I also don't understand why the traditional parties are sometimes SND and EPP seem to me to have lost their head. I mean, they're running everywhere. EPP going for far-right ideas, and the other day going for another idea, SND the same, so we need also them to, you know, come back.
Vice President, how about textbooks?
No,
1 minute.
I just want to say how looking forward I am to have the ticket for the first row for the European elections and afterwards, because I'm leaving politics, but textbooks, we don't have any competence to do that, but I think that we should do everything to unblock the money for the Hungarian students. Erasmus has been blocked, and the ball is on the Hungarian side, but I really do hope we will unblock that. Cordon sanitaire, I think bad thing. We should not do that, well, simply. But on the political parties, I think that one thing is one thing which is not debated so often, and Madame Delbos-Corfield mentioned ethics. I think now when the political parties are selecting people for the candidate lists, they should look into who are the people, what do they behind them, because you know the Qatar gate has shaken Brussels world, and the people do not differentiate whether it was the parliament, whether it was the commission, whoever. This is just another evidence that there is something rotten in Brussels, full stop. And we spoke about the trust. So ethics should also be among the criteria for the selection of the people who will have the courage to stand in front of the people and offer their service.
Thank you. Ramona, in 1 minute.
Very quickly, there was a comment that, you know, we finally, among others, talk about education. I just wanted to show you my paper, because I made all of these notes, and here the first word up here is education. And then it's critical thinking, free media, diverse activities, and actively supporting culture. Culture in all of its forms. And cultural diversity. And there's a reason, because there's no magical wand to fix this. And I want to talk about media freedom. I don't know, but it's important, you know, if I can get an extra minute, because I think it's again, an overarching topic, and it's so fundamental. July 1932, after winning the elections in Germany, Hitler, one of the first things that he made under the wand of Joseph Goebbels, he created this Ministry of Propaganda and Public Enlightenment. And he took under this umbrella everything, media first and foremost, free media, and you know, the directives on how the information should be disseminated to people were living directly from the Reich press office. Then culture as well, theaters, all of the cultural manifestations, and education, and he, you know, split it between Höring and the other friends and ideologists of the Nazi Party. And this allowed a monster to be born. They continued to manipulate people's minds to a degree that was impossible to control. The Anschluss in Austria was possible without an actual war because people were embracing this idea and because the propaganda through the media was making it possible long before they took over the media instruments on, you know, the next country as well. So who's taking the information to people? Free media. And if you turn editors and editors-in-chief into instruments of systems and of propaganda, when those governments have problems and they're populist governments, well, then you are breaking, effectively, millions and millions of minds. And you're preparing this grab of powers for years and maybe decades to come. We need to guarantee editorial independence. We need to do it with the Media Freedom Act. It is in there. We need to keep it in there. We need to explain what it means. Free media is the fourth pillar of a democratic state. Judges are protected. They're inamovable. Politicians are protected for their political statements. They have immunity. Well, nobody protects journalists and activists. And they are bringing public service and they are taking this quality information to people. And they're fighting for education as well. And they're countering disinformation because you can't counter it by building your own ministries of truth either. So I think we should keep our eyes very wide open to that.
Thank you very much for this very important point, Ramona. I'm looking at Ben. Is there anything that you can or want to say in 20 seconds?
No, I mean, no. It's a shame, I think, that I think it's very fascinating how the EU is finding its way in this and that we are aware that it's probably not enough, but we're exploring new avenues and finding some solutions. I mean, I think the conditionality mechanism is a good step forward. I think the Media Freedom Act is a good step forward. We're not there yet, but I'm very happy that we're having this debate, and there will be the successor of the commissioner will have her or his hands full, I think, still. The work is not done yet. Yeah.
Thank you, Ben, and thanks to all our speakers for your contributions and being here today, and thanks to you for coming to CEPS and being here in this debate. Have a nice day, everyone.